The King's Will and the Human Anomaly. The Galactic Council Hall was a marvel of both engineering and arrogance, its crystalline spires reaching into the void of space as if to mock the very stars. Within, the chamber bustled with representatives of species whose perfection bordered on the divine. Each delegate carried the weight of their civilization's pride, flaunting genetic designs that blended beauty, efficiency, and dominance. This was the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement, or so the Council believed. Commander Ethan Riker, Earth's lone ambassador, felt the weight of 1,000 scrutinizing eyes. His steps echoed against the iridescent floors as he walked toward his designated station. Among the genetically pristine and biologically optimized, he was an anomaly, a relic of a species that had chosen evolution through struggle rather than manipulation. Where others displayed glowing skin, symmetrically engineered features, and abilities tailored to perfection, Ethan was entirely ordinary. As Ethan took his seat, whispers rippled through the chamber. The annual convergence was no ordinary meeting. It was the galaxy's most important diplomatic event. Here, alliances were forged, trade agreements sealed, and disputes arbitrated. Yet today's session promised to be anything but routine. The death of King Exirion, ruler of the Prismatic Dominion, had thrown the galaxy into disarray. His passing left not just a power vacuum, but also an air of intrigue that clung to the council like a storm cloud. The chamber's luminous walls pulsed with a soft violet light, signaling the commencement of the proceedings. Grand Arbiter Lissar, a figure so mathematically symmetrical it bordered on unsettling, rose to address the assembly. His voice was a melodic harmony, engineered to command attention. Esteemed delegates of the Galactic Council, he began, his tone carrying an edge of solemnity. We gather today not only to honor the memory of King Exirion, but also to address an unprecedented matter of succession. The murmur of voices ceased instantly. Ethan, though no stranger to political theatrics, felt a flicker of curiosity. He had met King Exirion once during a diplomatic summit. The monarch had been a figure of contradictions, a ruler of one of the galaxy's most powerful empires, yet possessing a twinkle of mischief in his crystalline eyes. A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the chamber, revealing the imposing figure of the late king. His crystalline form shimmered like a living jewel, but his voice, rich with charisma, carried a warmth that transcended his alien nature. To the esteemed members of the Galactic Council, the recording began, and to the curious anomaly known as humanity, I leave a legacy that will challenge your perceptions and test your assumptions. Ethan's brow furrowed. The king's gaze seemed to settle on him through the projection, and a ripple of unease passed through the assembly. My will is simple, the recording continued. To Ambassador Ethan Riker of Earth, I leave my most treasured possession, my daughter, Princess Caroline Exirion. A stunned silence descended upon the chamber. The king's hologram faded, replaced by the image of Princess Caroline. Unlike the perfected crystalline forms of her kin, she was an oddity. Her translucent skin, which should have sparkled like a flawless gem, bore irregular patterns that refracted light chaotically. Her features, though delicate, lacked the engineered symmetry so prized among her people. Most striking of all were her eyes, large, expressive, and utterly unmodified. Ethan felt the weight of every gaze turned toward him. Whispers swirled like a gale, carrying words of disbelief and derision. The human, one voice scoffed. An insult to her lineage, muttered another. Grand Arbiter Lissar's expression remained impassive, but his voice betrayed a hint of disdain. Ambassador Riker, do you accept this inheritance? Ethan rose slowly, his mind racing. This wasn't just an unusual bequest. It was a political trap. To refuse would be to insult one of the galaxy's most influential empires. To accept would entangle Earth in a web of alliances and rivalries it was ill-prepared to navigate. He studied the hologram of Princess Caroline. Her imperfections, by the Council's standards, were glaring, but to him, they were a testament to something deeper. a rejection of the artificiality that dominated the galaxy. Her eyes, unaltered and vividly alive, seemed to plead for understanding. "I request an audience with the princess," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It would be improper to decide without meeting her." Gasps echoed through the chamber. No one had expected him to entertain the idea, let alone pursue it further. Lissar's expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Very well," the arbiter replied. "Your request will be granted." The chamber doors slid open with a crystalline chime, and Princess Caroline entered. A hush fell over the room. Her irregular form cast refracted rainbows across the walls, a kaleidoscope of light that was both chaotic and mesmerizing. She walked with a quiet dignity, her head held high despite the scornful stares that followed her every step. "Ambassador Riker," she said, her voice soft yet unwavering. "I apologize for the burden my father's will has placed upon you." Ethan inclined his head. "Your Highness, it is not a burden but an opportunity to honor a great king's legacy." Her eyes searched his, and for a moment, the chamber seemed to fade away. In that fleeting connection, Ethan saw not just a princess, but a soul weighed down by the expectations of a galaxy obsessed with perfection. "Then," she said with a faint smile, "let us determine whether this legacy is one worth embracing." As the chamber erupted into debate, Ethan knew one thing for certain. His decision would shape not only his own future, but also humanity's place in the galaxy. The meeting of imperfections. The private chamber where Ethan and Princess Caroline met was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Galactic Council Hall. While the Grand Assembly exuded calculated perfection, this room was smaller, dimly lit, and unexpectedly imperfect. The crystalline walls bore subtle flaws, tiny fractures that caught the light in odd ways. It was as if the space had been deliberately chosen to set the stage for their meeting, a room that reflected its occupants more than the galaxy's idealized vision. Ethan sat at the polished table, his hands clasped together, as he watched Caroline enter. Without the prying eyes of the council, her demeanor had softened. Her steps were still measured, her posture regal, but there was a vulnerability in the way her iridescent scales flickered with faint, uneven hues. Her eyes, unmodified and brimming with raw emotion, met his directly. "Ambassador Riker," she began, her voice carrying the faintest quiver. "Before we proceed, I must ask, why didn't you refuse outright? Surely the weight of my father's will is an unnecessary complication for your people." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Because complications are what make us human," he replied. "And I suspect your father understood that better than most." She tilted her head, her scales shimmering with curiosity. "You think my father intended this arrangement as more than a simple inheritance?" "I do," Ethan said. King Exurian wasn't just a ruler, he was a strategist. He knew the council would see this as a scandal, a spectacle. But he also knew it would force me to look beyond the surface, to see you for who you are. Caroline's expression softened. She sank gracefully into the chair opposite him, her movements fluid yet unpolished compared to her genetically optimized peers. "And what do you see, Ambassador?" Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "I see someone who has lived her entire life under the shadow of expectations she didn't choose. Someone who represents a beauty the galaxy has forgotten, a beauty in imperfection." Her lips parted slightly in surprise, and for a moment she seemed unsure how to respond. "You speak boldly for someone whose species is often dismissed as primitive." "That's because humanity doesn't measure itself by the galaxy's standards," Ethan replied. "We face challenges not by altering who we are, but by adapting, growing, and finding strength in what others see as flaws. Perfection isn't our goal. Progress is." Caroline studied him intently, her natural eyes flickering with shifting colors. "You're different from the others," she said quietly. "Most delegates wouldn't dare speak so candidly." "Most delegates aren't human," Ethan replied with a faint smile. "And if we're going to honor your father's wishes, I think honesty is a good place to start." The princess nodded, a faint blush of light rippling across her scales. "Then let me be honest as well. My father's will may have placed us in this situation, but I've spent my life being viewed as a failure of design. My people see me as flawed, broken. You must understand, aligning yourself with me will bring not just scrutiny but ridicule." Ethan's gaze hardened, his resolve solidifying. If there's one thing humanity excels at, it's defying expectations. I'm not here to win their approval. I'm here to honor a great king's legacy and perhaps prove that there's more to life than the artificial ideals this galaxy worships. Saraline's composure faltered for the first time, her voice softening. "You speak as though you already believe in me, Ambassador." "I believe in potential," Ethan said. "And from where I stand, you've already surpassed the Council's shallow standards." The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. For the first time in years, Saraline felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, unfamiliar sensation that warmed her from within. She straightened in her seat, her scales glowing faintly with renewed strength. "If we're to proceed," she said finally, "then let us do so with purpose. But you should know that accepting this union isn't just about navigating political tensions. My father's enemies will see this as an opportunity to undermine both of us. The prismatic dominion has powerful allies, but it also has adversaries who won't hesitate to exploit our perceived weakness." Ethan nodded, his expression growing serious. "I suspected as much. Earth may not be the strongest power in the galaxy, but we've faced our share of adversities. If this alliance is to work, we'll need to stand together." Saraline rose from her seat, her movements now steadier, more confident. "Then let us make it clear to the Council, and to the galaxy, that this isn't a decision made out of obligation or desperation. It's a partnership built on something they cannot quantify." Ethan stood as well, extending his hand in the universal gesture of trust. She hesitated for a moment before clasping it, her touch cool and firm. "Let them mock us," Ethan said with a small grin. "We'll show them what real strength looks like." As they left the chamber together, the whispers in the halls of the Galactic Council began to shift. Where there had been disdain, curiosity began to bloom. Two imperfect beings, each defying the rigid structures of their societies, had taken the first step towards something far greater. And in the shadows of the Council's labyrinthine corridors, unseen eyes watched, calculating the implications of this unexpected union. The alliance between Earth and the prismatic dominion would soon be tested, and the galaxy was far from ready for the storm it would unleash. The storm of opposition. The Galactic Council Hall had rarely seen such fervor. News of Ambassador Ethan Riker's decision to formally consider King Exurian's inheritance spread like wildfire, igniting debates in every corner of the galaxy. Delegates whispered in disbelief, media channels buzzed with speculation, and political factions began sharpening their strategies. To some, this was a scandal. To others, it was an opportunity. But for Ethan and Princess Saraline, it was a storm they would have to weather together. The Council's countermove. The next morning, Ethan found himself summoned to an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The chamber was far less crowded than before, with only the most influential figures present. Grand Arbiter Lissar presided at the head of the table, his unnervingly symmetrical face betraying no emotion as he called the meeting to order. "Ambassador Riker," Lissar began, his voice meticulously calibrated to command authority, "your actions yesterday have created significant ripples across the galaxy. The Council must address the potential implications of this unprecedented situation." Ethan stood tall, meeting the Arbiter's gaze without flinching. "I understand the gravity of the situation, Arbiter. That's why I've requested time to evaluate the circumstances before making a formal commitment." Lissar leaned forward, his crystalline eyes narrowing. Yet the mere act of entertaining this arrangement has already caused discord. The prismatic dominion's stability hangs by a thread, and Earth, a species with no significant genetic optimization or strategic value, is now at the center of it. The words stung, but Ethan refused to show it. Earth may not have the perfection you prize, but we bring something far more valuable: resilience, adaptability, and a perspective unclouded by centuries of genetic homogeny. The room erupted into murmurs, and Ethan's words hung in the air like a challenge. Lissar's expression tightened, but he pressed on. The Council cannot afford to let sentiment dictate galactic policy. Therefore, we propose an alternative. Princess Caroline will be reassigned to a diplomatic position within her empire, and Earth will withdraw from this inheritance arrangement. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. He had expected resistance, but not such an overt attempt to undermine the king's will. With all due respect, Arbiter, this isn't your decision to make. King Exirian's will is clear. Unless the princess herself objects, I have every right to proceed. All eyes turned to Caroline, who stood quietly at Ethan's side. Her scales shimmered faintly, betraying her unease, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I do not object. My father chose Ambassador Riker for a reason, and I trust his judgment. Lissar's carefully composed mask cracked for the briefest moment. Then you force our hand, Princess, he said. The Council will hold you both accountable for the consequences. An uneasy alliance. After the session adjourned, Ethan and Caroline retreated to a quiet chamber deep within the Council's labyrinthine halls. Tension hung between them, heavy and unspoken, until Caroline finally broke the silence. They won't let this stand, she said, her voice tinged with worry. The Council thrives on control. They'll see us as a threat. Ethan nodded, pacing the room. I expected resistance, but I didn't think they'd move this quickly. They're scared. Your father's legacy was too powerful, and this alliance threatens the balance they've worked so hard to maintain. Caroline's gaze dropped, her hands clasped tightly together. You've put yourself in their crosshairs because of me. I won't let you bear the weight of their anger alone. Ethan stopped pacing and turned to her. This isn't just about you or me. It's about showing the galaxy that strength doesn't come from perfection. It comes from embracing who we are, flaws and all. For the first time, a small smile broke through her guarded expression. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, Ambassador. Probably both, Ethan said with a grin. But I found that the two often go hand in hand. The first attack. Their resolve was soon tested. Later that evening, as Ethan and Caroline prepared for an informal gathering of their allies, an explosion rocked the corridor outside their chambers. Alarms blared, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning materials. Ethan barely had time to pull Caroline to cover before a second blast tore through the wall. Guards swarmed the area, their weapons raised, as a shadowy figure emerged from the smoke. The attacker was cloaked in advanced armor, its design unfamiliar to Ethan, but unmistakably lethal. Without hesitation, the figure opened fire, forcing Ethan to shield Caroline behind an overturned table. Stay down, Ethan shouted, drawing his sidearm. A standard-issue weapon, woefully underpowered compared to the enemy's arsenal. The attacker advanced, their shots tearing through the room's defenses with terrifying precision. Ethan fired back, aiming for weak points in the armor, but his shots ricocheted harmlessly. It was clear this was no ordinary assassin. Who sent you? Ethan demanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they raised a device that emitted a piercing, high-frequency pulse. Ethan's weapon fizzled out, and he felt a sharp pain in his ears. But just as the attacker closed in, Caroline stepped forward, her iridescent scales glowing with a sudden, brilliant intensity. A burst of light erupted from her, blinding the assailant and stunning everyone in the vicinity. Ethan seized the opportunity, lunging forward to tackle the attacker. In the struggle, the figure's helmet was knocked loose, revealing a face Ethan didn't recognize, but the insignia on their armor was unmistakable. The Council, Ethan muttered, his suspicions confirmed. Before he could interrogate the attacker further, reinforcements arrived, forcing the would-be assassin to retreat. The guards quickly secured the area, but the damage had been done. The message was clear. The Council's opposition was no longer just political, it was personal. A turning point. As the night wore on, Ethan and Caroline surveyed the wreckage of their quarters. The attack had left more than just physical scars. It was a reminder of the uphill battle they faced. "They won't stop," Caroline said, her voice heavy with resignation. "They'll keep coming, and they'll use every weapon at their disposal." "Then we'll fight back," Ethan replied firmly. "Not just for us, but for everyone who's been cast aside by this galaxy's obsession with perfection." Caroline looked at him, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. "If we're going to stand against them, we'll need allies, real ones, not just Earth, but other species who've suffered under the Council's rule." Ethan nodded. "Then let's find them. Together." In that moment, an unspoken pact was forged between them. They weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were challenging the very foundations of a galaxy that had lost its way. And as they prepared for the battles ahead, both knew that the storm was only just beginning. The unlikely coalition. The diplomatic shuttle cruised through the void, leaving the shimmering crystalline spires of the Galactic Council's homeworld behind. For the first time in days, Ethan and Caroline found themselves free of the suffocating scrutiny of the Council chambers. The reprieve, however, was fleeting. Their mission demanded swift action, and the stakes had never been higher. Ethan leaned against the viewport, watching the stars streak past. "They'll be expecting us to stay isolated," he said, his voice thoughtful. "The Council thrives on division. They use it to maintain control." Caroline, seated across the cabin, was silent for a moment before responding. "Then we must give them what they fear most: unity." Her crystalline scales glimmered faintly in the low light, a reflection of her resolve. "But finding allies who are willing to risk defying the Council will not be easy." Ethan turned to her, his expression firm. Easy isn't in humanity's vocabulary. A call for unity. Their first destination was the planet Geras, home to the Arcanae, a species once known for their resilience and innovation, now reduced to a shadow of their former glory. The Arcanae had resisted genetic optimization, refusing to alter their natural forms. In retaliation, the Council had economically crippled them, branding them as a cautionary tale for other species. The shuttle landed on the outskirts of a sprawling city. From the window, Ethan saw remnants of the Arcanae's once great civilization. Crumbling towers entwined with vines, markets bustling with activity despite the air of hardship, and people whose spirit had not yet been extinguished. Ethan and Caroline stepped onto the dusty streets, their presence drawing curious and wary gazes. The Arcanae leader, Elder Keros, met them in a modest council chamber, his weathered features a testament to years of struggle. "You come here with bold intentions, Ambassador," Keros said, his tone guarded. "What makes you think we would risk further wrath from the Council by aligning with you?" Ethan spoke earnestly. "Because you know better than anyone what it means to be cast aside for refusing to conform. The Council's vision of perfection is a cage, and the galaxy has been living in it for far too long. Together, we can prove there's another way." Keros's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to Caroline. "And you, Princess, you come from privilege. Why should we believe you understand our plight?" Caroline stepped forward, her voice steady and sincere. "Because I've lived it in my own way. My people see me as a failure, an embarrassment to their ideals. But I've come to realize that what they see as imperfection is actually my strength. I won't let them dictate my worth any longer, and neither should you." Keros studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You speak with conviction. The Arcanae will hear you out, but words alone won't be enough. We need more than promises. We need action. A test of trust." Elder Keros revealed that the Arcanae had been targeted by a rogue faction of the Council's enforcers, who had blockaded their trade routes and cut off vital supplies. If Ethan and Caroline truly wanted to prove their commitment, they would need to break the blockade. The mission was perilous. The Council's enforcers were equipped with advanced technology, their ships armed with weaponry far superior to anything Ethan's shuttle could offer. Yet retreat was not an option. As they approached the blockade, Sarah Lane studied the tactical display with a furrowed brow. "We can't match their firepower," she said. "But perhaps we don't need to." Ethan glanced at her, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" Sarah Lane's eyes gleamed with determination. "Their ships rely on synchronized crystal matrices to maintain their shields. If we can disrupt the synchronization, even for a moment, it could create an opening." Ethan grinned. "That's a bold plan, Princess." "It's a plan born of necessity," she replied. Using the shuttle's limited resources, they modified an energy pulse to target the matrices. As they neared the blockade, the Enforcer's ships closed in, their weapons charging. Sarah Lane activated the pulse, sending out a cascade of energy that rippled through the void. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the Enforcer's shields flickered and collapsed. Ethan seized the opportunity, piloting the shuttle through the gap in the blockade. Their maneuver was daring and precise, and against all odds, they emerged on the other side unscathed, winning the Arcanae. When Ethan and Sarah Lane returned to Geras, they were greeted as heroes. Elder Karos, once skeptical, now regarded them with a newfound respect. "You've done more than we expected," he said. "The Arcanae will stand with you, Ambassador. But know this, defying the Council will bring consequences we cannot yet imagine." Ethan nodded, his expression resolute. "We're ready for whatever comes." A ripple across the stars. Word of their success on Geras spread quickly, sparking interest from other disenfranchised species. The Ragathans, a race of bioengineers forced into servitude by the Council, reached out with offers of assistance. The Mirren Collective, whose individuality had been stripped away in the pursuit of perfection, began to reconsider their allegiance. As the coalition grew, so did the danger. The Council's spies were everywhere, and whispers of rebellion reached their ears. Yet with each new ally, Ethan and Sarah Lane felt their resolve strengthen. "This is only the beginning," Sarah Lane said one evening as they reviewed their progress. "The galaxy is starting to see what we've known all along. Perfection is an illusion. It's our differences, our struggles, that make us strong." Ethan smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "And now we're showing them that strength doesn't have to come from conformity. It comes from unity." But even as they celebrated their victories, the shadow of the Council loomed ever larger. They would not allow this coalition to grow unchecked, and the storm of opposition was far from over. Ethan and Sarah Lane had lit a spark in the darkness. Now they would need to keep it alive against forces determined to snuff it out. The seeds of rebellion. The coalition's momentum was undeniable. Across the galaxy, whispers of defiance spread like wildfire. Species once oppressed by the Council's rigid ideals began to see a glimmer of hope. The alliance forged by Ethan and Sarah Lane wasn't just growing, it was becoming a movement. Yet with every step forward, the shadow of the Council grew darker, their retaliation more imminent. As Ethan and Sarah Lane prepared for their next diplomatic mission, they knew the stakes were higher than ever. Their journey to unite the galaxy's outcasts was no longer just a diplomatic endeavor. It was a rebellion in the making. The call to unity. Their next destination was Elithra, home to the Mirren Collective. Unlike the Arcanae, or the other allies they'd gathered so far, the Mirrens were not individuals but a hive-mind species. For centuries, the Council had lauded the Mirrens as the pinnacle of unity and efficiency, a living example of what perfection could achieve. But beneath the surface of this idealized existence lay a darker truth. The Mirrens had sacrificed their individuality to achieve their collective consciousness. The Council's genetic optimization programs had stripped them of personal agency, turning them into tools for galactic governance. Ethan and Sarah Lane's shuttle landed in a city of towering crystalline spires, their surfaces reflecting 1,000,000 shades of light. The Mirren representatives awaited them in a vast hall, their identical features and synchronized movements a testament to their engineered sameness. "Ambassador Riker, Princess Caroline. The Mirrans spoke in unison, their voices blending into a single eerie harmony. You have come to disrupt the harmony of the galaxy. Explain yourselves. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. We've come to offer you a choice. For too long, the Council has used your people as a symbol of their vision, a vision that denies individuality and freedom. We believe you deserve more than to be tools in their system. The Mirrans' collective gaze fixed on him. Freedom is an illusion. Individuality breeds chaos. The Council has ensured our survival and prosperity. Caroline spoke next, her tone earnest. Survival without freedom is existence without meaning. I know what it's like to live under the weight of expectations you didn't choose, but there's strength in reclaiming what's been taken from you. For a moment, the Mirrans were silent, their collective consciousness processing the implications of her words. Then one among them, a representative with a faint scar along his otherwise flawless face, stepped forward. I was not always part of the collective, he said, his voice trembling with a hint of individuality. Before I was assimilated, I had dreams, desires, fears. I remember what it meant to be me. What you offer is dangerous, but it is also hope. The room rippled with faint murmurs, an unprecedented display of discord among the Mirrans. Ethan seized the moment. Hope is dangerous, but it's also the only thing that can break the chains of oppression. Join us, and we'll show the galaxy that the Council's vision of perfection is a lie. The scared Mirran looked to his peers, his voice growing stronger. I will stand with you. If even one of us can remember what it means to be free, then perhaps we all can. A dangerous alliance. The Mirrans' decision to join the coalition sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Council, long accustomed to using the Mirrans as their enforcers and propaganda tool, now faced an unprecedented challenge. With every ally Ethan and Caroline gained, the rebellion grew stronger. And so did the Council's desperation. That desperation soon took a deadly turn. During a diplomatic meeting with the Regathans, a species renowned for their bioengineering prowess, an assassin struck. The Regathans had just pledged their support to the coalition, offering their expertise in creating sustainable technologies for oppressed worlds. But as the delegates raised their glasses in a toast, a shadow slipped through the crowd. Ethan's instincts kicked in just in time. He pushed Caroline aside as a blade, shimmering with a deadly toxin, slashed through the air. The assassin, a humanoid cloaked in advanced stealth armor, moved with calculated precision, their eyes cold and unrelenting. Guards swarmed the room, but the assassin fought with an efficiency that betrayed elite training. Ethan lunged, grappling with the attacker, while Caroline scrambled to shield the Regathan delegates. Despite his lack of enhancements, Ethan's military training and raw determination gave him an edge. He disarmed the assassin, pinning them to the ground. "Who sent you?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp. The assassin smirked, their lips curling into a mocking grin. "You're fighting a battle you can't win, Ambassador. The Council doesn't lose." Before Ethan could press further, the assassin bit down on something hidden in their mouth. A moment later, their body went limp. A suicide capsule, standard for the Council's most loyal operatives. The spark ignites. The attack left the coalition shaken but undeterred. It was a stark reminder that their fight was no longer in the shadows. The Council knew of their growing influence and was willing to use any means necessary to crush them. Ethan addressed the coalition's leaders in a private meeting aboard a neutral space station. The room was filled with representatives from the Arcani, Regathans, Mirrans, and other species who had quietly pledged their support. "We've made progress," Ethan began, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "But progress comes with a cost. The Council won't stop until they've destroyed everything we've built. We need to be ready for what's coming." Elder Karos, the Arcani leader, nodded gravely. "The Council thrives on fear. We must show them that we will not be intimidated." The scared Mirran stepped forward, his voice resonating with newfound strength. "For the first time, my people are beginning to see the cracks in the Council's lies. If we stand together, we can be the light that guides the galaxy out of the darkness. Caroline, standing beside Ethan, added, "This isn't just a rebellion, it's a revolution. We're not fighting to destroy the galaxy's systems, we're fighting to rebuild them, to create a future where every species can thrive without losing their identity." The room erupted in agreement, the energy palpable. The coalition wasn't just a loose alliance anymore. It was becoming a force capable of challenging the Council's stranglehold on the galaxy. The Council strikes back. But even as the coalition solidified its plans, the Council prepared their counterstrike. Hidden in the shadows of their glittering chambers, the Council's leaders convened, their flawless faces etched with rare concern. "We underestimated them," Grand Arbiter Lissar admitted, his tone cold. "The human and the princess have stirred a hornet's nest. It's time to remind the galaxy why the Council's authority is absolute." In the depths of their hidden facilities, the Council activated a weapon they had long kept secret. A fleet of experimental ships, armed with technology far beyond anything the Coalition had encountered, began to mobilize. Their target: the Coalition's growing stronghold on Geras. The storm was coming, and it would test everything Ethan and Caroline had built. But as the stars shimmered in the void, Ethan's words echoed in the hearts of their allies. "Hope is dangerous, but it's the only thing that can change the galaxy."